Hello and welcome back to B&J's Little Farm. Today we are on Wings of a Dream, chapter 26. I hope you enjoy and follow along. Here we go. 2 days later, a host of noises from the yard sent me flying to the frosted window. I rubbed a spot clear. 2 men in overalls disappeared behind the storage shed near the hogs enclosure. What in heaven's name? Who was roaming our property without speaking to me first? My fury rose like bread dough in a hot kitchen as I charged into the barnyard. I rounded the corner of the shed and slammed into a body. Wet sloshed down the front of my dress. The overall-clad man stepped back and raised his head. "Sheriff?" I'd never seen him in anything but a suit before. My mouth gapped, but I managed to shut it. Then I noticed the almost full milk bucket hanging from his hand. He handed me the pail and stuck his hand in his pockets, leaving a ratty hat familiar atop of his head. "There's your morning milk, and I brought some help to butcher your hog." I swallowed down a yelp as I turned to see the large black pot sitting beside a smoldering fire. I looked back at the sheriff. All I'd ever done at butchering time was make dinner for all those who came to lend a hand. I'd never made head cheese or cracklings or put up lard or readied meat for the smokehouse. Mama did that herself. Another man in work clothes stood beside us now. "Miss Hendricks?" The sheriff turned formal all of a sudden. "Meet Eliza Tate. His brother is over yonder sharpening the knives." I nodded at the Mr. Tate. He tucked his fingers around the straps of his overalls and rocked back on his heels. Sheriff Jeffries pulled me aside. "The Lathams will arrive soon as well. Give each family a few pieces of meat for the trouble, and they'll be mighty grateful." He must have read the panic in my eyes then, for he laughed. "The women will take care of everything. You just need to feed everyone." I sighed. That I knew how to do. At the end of the day, the sheriff lingered behind the others, making sure he said that the fire had been completely doused. I stood with him, shivering beneath my coat, my breath visible, puffs of white in the moon-dimmed dark. "Thank you." I hated feeling in debt to him, but I took great comfort in the hams and the bacon slabs soaking in the curing syrup. He shrugged. "Nothing one neighbor wouldn't do for another. I think you are more neighborly than most." He poked a stick into the cooling ash. "It isn't hard to want to help you." I sucked in the smoky night air. I smoked in. I can't talk. I suck in the smoky night air. It's cold, stinging my nose and my chest. Though that night with Arthur on the front steps of the schoolhouse in Downington hadn't been cold. Suddenly it seemed too familiar to this one, all alone, in the dark, words that could mean so many different things. "Thank you," I said. His shoulder raised and lowered as he stared into the distance. I wondered what his life was like, a single man in a small town, no family to speak of. Prater's Junction didn't seem to have many girls of an age for him to be interested in. So why didn't he go elsewhere? Nothing held him here that I could see. He threw that stick on top of the fire pit. I did it. I pulled my coat closer around me. Did what? Asked to be considered for a Texas Ranger? I shoved my hands into my pockets of my coats. "Congratulations. I hope they accept you." He stepped closer, so close that I could see every inch of his face in spite of the cloak of night. "I'd never have dared but for you." With a hard swallow, I stepped away from the reach of his arms and his lips. I had no intention of falling for a man I didn't really know. Not again. Besides, though the sheriff had an endearing qualities, my heart didn't leap at his nearness. Rebecca? Ollie's voice from the house. Sheriff Jeffries touched his hat, stepped back, and nodded. See you at church on Sunday, Rebecca. I watched him walk away. This sheriff, dressed as a farmer, was he the reason God had brought me here? Was I missing his plan? Out of sight, the engine of the sheriff's car roared to life, and his door slammed shut. He might be on his way to a bigger place, maybe even one filled with the adventure I longed for. But could my heart come to love him? Only after hearing the gears grind into place and the tires spew earth did I take myself into the warmth of the house. A blue northerner swooped in the next day, not just cold, frigid, with the wind howling around the windows as if seeking refuge from itself. I had plenty of time to ponder my future as I huddled under quilts in front of the parlor fireplace, playing games with the children, reading my newspaper and magazines. Then I heard something that didn't sound like the wind. Untangling myself from the quilt tucked around my knees, I peered through the dingy glass. A large automobile sat in front of the gate, its occupant bundled into obscurity behind the windscreen. The engine coughed itself still. The driver climbed from the seat. Wait here, I told the children as I hurried to let the stranger in out of the biting wind. Icy air swirled in with his stamping feet. Arthur? His name came out in a whisper, a breath. I'd been afraid to breathe for weeks. My hand searched behind me for the banister, something solid to anchor me upright. Hello, Rebecca. Arthur removed his hat, his gloves, unbuttoned his coat. Gas fumes and cigarette smoke wafted from his outerwear, the smell of leaving and staying all mixed up together. As he arranged his things on the small table opposite the stairs, his gaze darted around the hall, searching, it seemed, for whoever else might be privy to our conversation. I'm sorry, he said finally. His eyes hadn't landed on me in spite of the fact that I stared directly at his face. I tried to swallow moisture into my mouth. Where's your fiancé? I don't know. James stomped into the hall, fists clenched, face blotched with fury. Rebecca, Dan's cheating. Arthur's eyes locked on mine. I sensed his fear in the fearless aviator. I taught them to play checkers. I twirled the words as if we bantered the light conversation of a social gathering. But I wondered at his manner. Did children in general frighten him, or just these at this moment? I put my hand on James' shoulder, but didn't look down. Go put the game away, James. But I don't want to. I'm winning. I pursed my lips and counted to 5. You and Dan can put on your coats and go outside and swing. It's too cold outside, came the whining reply. Sensing Arthur's impatience, I leaned near James' ear, words hissing out of my almost closed lips. Then find something to do, but don't fight with your brother. I tried to make my voice sound normal as my hand pitched James' shoulder. Now, James, I need to talk with my friend. In the kitchen, you and Dan behave. James sulked his way back into the parlor, but at least he went. I swept past Arthur and heard him follow. I moved the coffee pot to the hot front burner and tried to think of a way to fill the awkward silence. Arthur stood at the table. I motioned him to sit. When the coffee had warmed, I filled 2 cups. Do you still take cream? He nodded. I added a dollop of old Bob's offering and sat across from him, preparing myself to hear what he had to say. He swallowed down half his coffee before he spoke. I came to see if we had any chance of starting over. I flinched and caught my breath. His audacity slapping me with the force of an open hand. Start over? I felt Mama's face fit over mine like a mask. The haughty look she reserved for those who addressed her in a manner less than respectful. A fiancé ends things quite thoroughly, and yet my heart lurched at the thought that he wanted me again. He leaned back in his chair, a tad more confident it seemed, more like the Arthur I'd fallen in love with. She and I were thrown together during the quarantine. It wasn't like I went looking for another woman, he shrugged. Besides, with the war over, I'll be discharged. We can be together much sooner than we thought possible. Be together? As in get married? Something in his manner alarmed me. I wasn't sure what it was. The return of his arrogance, perhaps. Again, his gaze skittered away eventually. The word barbed at my heart. But you were going to marry her right away, weren't you? You told me you were engaged. He stared at the door that led outside. She didn't have any reason to wait. You have. He swatted his hand toward the front of the house, where the children remained quiet. I stiffened. I have responsibilities at the moment. Yes. We have to wait then, until you get rid of them. My eyebrows lifted. Get rid of them? What do you mean? Are you saying you don't want children? Or that you don't want these children? We have our own life to lead, Rebecca. Children would complicate things. Their daddy will be home soon, right? And then you'll be free. Besides, I don't remember you being eager for babies before. I chewed the edge of my fingernail as I considered how to reply. You're right, I wasn't. But things have changed. My mother has been ill. My brother is dying. I haven't heard back from the children's father. But it's more than that. My mouth proclaimed words I hadn't even thought through completely. Words that popped from the soil of my heart like green beans on a hot summer day. His mouth opened and shut, smooth words slithering from his gasp. That handsome face, those deep blue eyes, they'd rope me in like a naive calf. But I wasn't as childlike as I'd once been. I stood up, raised my chin, and gave him Mama's disapproving look. I think you better leave now. His eyes narrowed, weighing his options, I guess, wondering how much fight I had in me. After what seemed like an eternity, he pushed back from the table. Yes, I have to get back. I handed him his hat and gloves and tapped my foot as he shrugged into his coat. I didn't bother to walk him to his car or even watch him out the gate. I slammed the front door behind him as soon as his feet cleared the threshold. I found Dan and James pouting on opposite sides of the sofa in the parlor. The smile on my face felt like it rose up all the way from my toes. Come on, boys, let's make some hot cocoa. They leaped to their feet, each grabbing one of my hands. I glanced back at the window. The cart Arthur had arrived in had disappeared from sight. I drew myself a bath that night. I didn't care that it was bitter cold outside or that it wasn't Saturday. I had not taken very good care of myself since that trip to Dallas, but now I resolved to put Arthur completely behind me, to move forward, even if I remained unsure of my destination. I leaned my head back until it hung over the side of the tin tub. The warm water like velvet on my dry skin. A bucket of rainwater sat nearby for my hair, but I didn't relish the coolness it would bring to my bath. Not yet. With a bar of lavender-scented store-bought soap, I scrubbed the grime from my body, and with sheer determination, I scrubbed Arthur's from my mind. Chapter 27. I made it easy for the kids to count down the days until Christmas by hanging a length of rope on the banister, one knot tied for each day until December 25th. Just before bed each night, we released the garland knot and let it flow loose. Each day the rope trailed longer. I felt worse for the children. Not only would it be their first Christmas without their mother, it seemed unlikely their father would make it home either. Their questions plagued me, not the least of which were the queries about Santa Claus. How would Frank want me to answer? And with each passing day, my heart fluttered even more at the thought of Frank's sudden arrival into our little world. I wanted him to take over the care of the children and leave me free to pursue my dreams, didn't I? The last Saturday before Christmas, I hitched Dandy to the buggy myself and drove us into town. Turning up the collar of my coat, I directed our steps to the brick building on the corner. Our bit of cash had evaporated like a pond in summer in spite of my efforts to buy only necessities after the Dallas fiasco. But I was determined that the children would have Christmas, even if their father couldn't be with them. I'd make sure he provided presents all the same. I couldn't ask the Lanthams to help. They struggled just to put food on the table for their family of 10. I didn't imagine Christmas at their house consisted of much more than some fruit and candy. But Frank had to have money in the bank, didn't he? His crops had been harvested in the fall. A fierce wind held the heavy door fast, but I peered it open far enough for us to slip inside. Warmth cocooned me as the smell of wood polish and cool smoke mingled with the sharpness of the winter air. I pulled off my gloves, took a deep breath, and approached the barred window. "May I help you?" The gentleman behind the bars craned his neck to look past me, looking for my husband or my father, I suspected. "I need some money from Frank Gresham's account." The man's cheek twitched as he smoothed the edge of his mustache. "This is quite irregular, miss." I pulled back my shoulders. "Rebecca Hendricks? I've been caring for the Gresham children since my Aunt Annabelle Williams." My stiffness softened a bit. "Since October. Please wait here a moment." I sat the children on the floor, their backs against the amber wood that ran the length of the room. I didn't figure this to take a long time, but the moments stretched. I peered into the space behind the iron bars, but couldn't see the teller I had spoken with. Only the big silver door of the vault closed tight. "Miss Hendricks?" I reared around and found myself face to face with a man whose eyes danced in a jolly sort of way. "I'll be pleased to speak with you in my office." He motioned me to walk ahead. I gave the children a look that I hoped said, "Stay put," before I followed. Seated in the chair that faced his desk, my heart threatened to bounce from my chest as his smooth fingers closed around each other and settled calmly on his desk. Hands that counted money instead of clawing the dirt to make crops grow. "I understand you have questions about Mr. Gresham's account." I glanced at the children through the plate glass window. "Actually, I need to withdraw some money. It's nearly Christmas. I want it to be special for the children." He pulled a sack of papers towards him and settled a pair of speculars on his pudgy nose. "I understand, Miss Hendricks. Unfortunately, Mr. Gresham maintains only a nominal amount of money in an account in our bank. Next to nothing, really." My stomach soured. Frank had nothing in the bank? But in one letter I read he told Aunt Annabelle to divide the crop money as usual. Divide it how? Put it where? I stared at my purse, fingering the clasp. Frank's letters had been detailed and specific. He seemed to prefer his house and farm kept in similar fashion, like my daddy, and Daddy always kept money saved in the bank. Hasn't he sent home his army pay? The banker asked. I found a little money in the house. My face burned as I thought again of what I'd wasted on my trip to Dallas. The man cleared his throat, obviously ill at ease. Given Frank Grissom's reputation, I'm sure Mr. Crenshaw will accommodate you. My back straightened. Reputation for what? For spending money he didn't have or making good on the debit he owed? Thank you. I stood, shook his hand. If Frank hadn't provided anything for his children, I'd have to take care of them myself. If only Daddy's instructions never to buy on credit didn't sound so loud in my head. With only 3 knots left in our rope, we scampered through a sparse clump of trees near the creek in search of a small pine. We found one, barely more than a stick really, but given that James and I had to cut and carry it, it was perfect. Beads, thread on a string, adorned its branches, and a few store-bought decorations that had been wrapped in paper and stored in Aunt Annabelle's dresser drawer bowed the limbs. Can we bake a cinnamon cake for breakfast? Ollie asked. I hesitated. Mama and Miss Ada always did, she whispered. Of course we can. But even while I smiled, I wondered if the recipe would show itself in one of my aunt's books, or if I'd have to make it up as I went along. A quick search of the kitchen turned up a newspaper clipping pasted on the fly leaf of another cookbook. So we baked and worked all that night and most of the next day, Christmas Eve. Finally, we hung their socks on the mantel and crept to our beds. Will I hear Santa Claus when he comes? Dan asked. I tucked the covers around him and kissed his cheek. I don't think so. He won't come until he knows you're asleep. I twinkled his nose. He laughed and squeezed his eyes shut. Tell him to come now, Becca. I'm asleep. Their whispers drifted through the thin walls until long past midnight. But even after they quieted, I couldn't sleep. I'd done the right thing buying them gifts, hadn't I? I tossed and turned and prayed, begging God to at least let Dan cover the amount if Frank protested. Daddy cover the amount if Frank protested. Just about that time, my eyelids dropped into sleep, for children scrambled into my bed, jarring me awake. Let me go down first, I said, inching out from under the covers. I'll get the fire going and call you. Don't take our presents. The look on Dan's face told me he sincerely feared I would. I brushed the hair from his forehead. I wouldn't dare. Throwing a shawl over my shoulders and socks on my feet, I hurried to the parlor. My hands shook as I lit the kindling beneath the fat logs laid just for this morning. Smoke billowed before the flame caught. I lit 2 lamps, bowing back the dim darkness of early morning. On the mantel, each sock bulged with an orange and a peppermint stick, a special toy peeking from the top. The pitter-patter of feet on the stairs didn't give me time for reflection. Merry Christmas! I grinned and joined their frenzy of excitement in spite of the question pounding in my head. Would Frank have the money to cover his children's presents? Would he approve of what I had purchased? Ollie cradled her new doll. Dan tried to make words with his alphabet blocks, and James connected the sticks and wheels of the Tinker toys. Janie stared at a teddy bear, occasionally putting out a pudgy hand to stroke the fur. Yet all I could see was the page in Mr. Crenshaw's ledger book. Frank Gresson, $5.43. $5 that could have bought material to replace the clothes the children were fast outgrowing, or buy a few canned goods to supplement our meals, or patent medicines to help keep us well. I pressed my hand to either side of my head, trying to stop the furor of my thoughts, but it didn't help. I thought of shoes and doctor bills and kerosene and candles, of soap, the staple goods, and seeds, and I needed fresh air. I opened the front door and stepped outside. Each breath swirling white in front of my face. Smoke puffed from our chimney, filling my nose with the sharp smell of burnt wood. I walked the length of the porch, my hands wrapping around each other, my thoughts racing off in a distance. I had no desire for them to go. To Arthur, Will, Mama, Frank, I don't know how long I stood there, long enough to lose feeling in my fingers and toes. Only after I sat in the parlor, a wool shawl around my shoulders, a cup of hot tea in my hands, did I realize that Irene had rescued me yet again. I had a Holy Spirit moment this morning, she told me, as I sat along on the sofa, the children upstairs donning their visiting clothes. While we were reading from Luke, the Lord told me there was another child, wretched and cold, who needed me this Christmas morning, but I didn't imagine he meant it so literally. I tried to smile with her, but my cheeks remained still as icicles. She laid her hands on my knee. You miss your mama as much as they miss theirs. I nodded, took a sip of the honey-sweetened tea. Chamomile, if I had to guess. I had a letter from her a few days ago, chiding me for not coming home for Christmas. I hate to disappoint Mama, but I know it's right that I stay, even if she doesn't understand. I took another sip of tea. I just didn't think growing up would be so confusing. Irene patted my knee. George and I didn't think straight, what with putting up little presents for all the children. It slipped our mind that you'd be needing someone to be your family. Can you forgive us? I balanced the cup on my knee, still cradling its warmth with my hands, grateful tears sprouting into my eyes. She eased the teacup from my hands and wrapped her arms around me. I'll listen if you want to talk. I didn't think I could, but I poured out the sad tale of Arthur, of trying to be still and listen to the Lord's direction, of my confession over the sheriff's words and Frank's imminent homecoming. I'd left home believing I had the Lord's blessing to follow my dreams. Now I didn't know if I had any dreams to follow, let alone any direction from the Lord. Irene's head tilted as if she listened for or to something far away. Maybe she heard the children's ruckus overhead. Maybe she heard the voice of God. I know it's hard for a young woman like you to believe, but once dreamed of a very different life for myself than the one I live. Although she listened to my story without expression, I knew my shock of her statement showed clearly on my face. Irene chuckled. You wouldn't know it to look at me now, but in my younger days I had a beau for every day of the week. I smiled. She laughed harder, her rounded girth shaking like a bowl of jello. I'd eaten at Arthur's aunt's house, it's true. I didn't give George Latham a second look back then. With his droopy eyes and his never-ending piety, good gracious, I had intended to marry someone handsome and wealthy, someone who would lavish me with fine things, someone fun. Her eyes took on a farewell look. I don't really know what I wanted. I just knew it wasn't him. But life has a way of surprising you sometimes. A dreamy smile appeared on her face, and I prompted. She looked surprised, as if she had forgotten anyone else shared the room. It took time. You see, he had to wait for me to find real faith in the Lord, not just as it's expected of me Sunday's attendance, my back stiffened. My favorite sister died of tuberculosis. Her death devastated me. Other beaux either came and petted me and told me everything would be fine, or they'd stay away, not knowing what to do. Only George offered me real hope, the Jesus kind. And he didn't just say the words, he showed me by his actions. Then he showed me where to find the words in the Bible. The more I read, the more I understood that God wanted my whole life, everything, even my plans and dreams. So God told you to marry Brother Latham? In a roundabout way, yes, but I couldn't fall in love with George until I had fallen in love with Jesus. But I already know the Lord, so what does that mean for me? Irene's eyes held mine. It means when your life belongs to God, it doesn't belong to you anymore. It means sometimes life turns out different than you plan. He will guide your path, as it says in the Proverbs, but you have to trust that he has your good in mind and follow where he leads. He led me to Arthur, perhaps, or maybe he has something different in mind for you. But I'm not like you and Aunt Annabelle and Mama. I can't bear the thought of living out my life on a farm. I need people and adventure. That's what I was made for. I know it is. Irene didn't reply. Janie's cry broke the tension of silence. Irene stood. Follow the path that the Lord has laid out before you. If you listen for his voice and obey it, everything will turn out fine in the end. Now let's go celebrate Christmas. As the children bounded into the room, clutching their gifts, I realized that God hadn't forgotten or abandoned me. He'd shown that by sending Irene his special Christmas gift just for me. Alright, you guys, that is the reading for this week. I hope you tune in to next week, next Saturday, for chapter 28. Stay happy, healthy, and safe, and I will see you next time.